Starlink is the largest commercial deployment of microsatellites in Earth orbit. And it's fascinating because a public citizen basically going about and creating the satellite network that encompasses the entire globe. That's the mission, and he's well on his way. Elon has the ability to beam connectivity anywhere in the world. If you look at this visualization, it is almost all-encompassing. Talk about a prison planet. You effectively have a complete grid of satellite imagery encompassing the entire globe. Also, at the same time, the ability to beam in telecommunications anywhere in the world. You could literally be beaming K-pop videos right into Afghanistan to the Taliban towns. That's how you spread democracy, baby. Let's fucking go. And look, a private citizen doing this with a commercial enterprise has its pros and cons. In the Ukraine battle, it has been easy for Elon to beam in internet for critical telecommunications in this time where Russia was effectively jamming all communication in and out of the country.
SpaceX sent thousands of Starlink terminals to Ukraine last year to provide internet communication.
In that sort of situation where we've got this national crisis, Elon's been able to step in and actually be helpful to the Ukraine war. We've got private companies that are being so crucial in a geopolitical context and being able to exert immense amount of influence that has traditionally been reserved purely for the public sector. Now that obviously has pros and cons. The pros we just went through, the cons are obvious as well.
There are some people who believe that you are a genius, and there are some who believe that you are evil.
You can be both. I mean, you could be an evil genius.
Now, if you've got this all-encompassing satellite grid, but you also operate frickin' Tesla, and you've got imagery on the ground and sensors everywhere, then that's almost too much power for one private citizen to hold. And if you thought that was enough, layer in Twitter on top of that. That is literally a digital twin of our global conversation. Every tweet is what we feel about a certain issue. And in aggregate, Twitter allows you to figure out the heartbeat and pulse of various issues. It is polling before polling. You can predict which way sentiment is going. And all taken together, when you look at things like Starlink, like Twitter, Tesla, fused together into this grand entity. And therein lies Elon Musk's grand design. He wants to create an app called X.
Billionaire Elon Musk has launched his long-teased artificial intelligence startup XAI.
Take the best real-world model of the world, take the best digital model of the world, fuse them together into this all-in-one platform and application where you can get anything you want. You can move bits or atoms. You want to order something, you want to buy something. That is his dream, the app for absolutely anything. And I think these are the primitives at his disposal to make that happen. If you think about it, we are looking at a sensor apparatus that extends from space to ground. At the same time, we're talking about Twitter, which is in the phone in our pockets.
According to its website, the new company will work with Twitter, Tesla, and other companies to understand the true nature of the universe.
So this kind of full spectrum dominance, as it's called in military and defense parlance, that is an ability that Elon has now. I think the real decider of whether this is too much power is how inextricably linked these operations are to the public apparatus. What do I mean by that? NASA was ostensibly designed to be a civilian space program and not be focused on military application. A lot of countries at the time were very worried about the militarization of space. And then obviously the Star Wars program and things like that followed. Now, SpaceX and Starlink ostensibly are civilian enterprises, but we've already seen with exceptional circumstances such as Ukraine.
Starlink relies on a network of satellites in low orbit around the Earth to provide wireless communication.
They are able to quickly mobilize and provide ostensibly public sector-like services. In this sort of context, you have to ask yourself whether the SpaceX contract for $1.9 million, which is not that much to be honest, the real question is, if off the books, there are certain sensors that are being installed on these SpaceX satellite systems, because that's how the government would want to do it too, right? You wouldn't want to be open about, hey, everybody, we're putting exactly these sensors on all of these satellites that are going to be flying over your country. Be sure to look out for them. No, they're not going to want to do that. They're going to want to make it feel like, hey, these are just a bunch of these micro satellites that are designed purely for internet purposes. Yes, we have cameras, but they're not pointed at the Earth. The cameras are pointed at the stars. That's a star positioning system to figure out where the satellites are. If I was a betting man, I would guess that is exactly what's happening, because that's what I would do. Anyone would want to do that. What Elon is building is absolutely awe-inspiring, and not just in space, on the ground too. So if we think about it, every single Tesla car is effectively like a Google Street View vehicle, always going around imaging things, comparing the observations that it's seeing against its prior map of the world, and figuring out what the deltas and differences are. And as a consequence, it is effectively a change detection machine. Now aggregate all the Tesla fleet together and you've got a change detection apparatus, which means you've got a surveillance apparatus. Of course, Tesla is also mindful about this stuff. It's not just indiscriminately sending up imagery from your cars. There's not enough data to do that. But when it does detect those differences on an aggregate basis, when you go back and plug in your car for charging at night, it is connecting to the Wi-Fi or using the cellular connectivity inside the car itself to upload those deltas so the Tesla fleet can build a self-healing map of the world. And that is a lot of power too. Right now, Tesla is working with companies like Google that are ostensibly the premier company that has created a digital twin of the real world to get you from point A to point B, to get you to the right shop, to tell you what's where, when, and how busy things are right now too. Tesla can do that as well. Tesla has this fleet. It has a very good idea of traffic conditions. Now, at the same time, they're using Google today as a base map in their own mapping applications, but eventually Tesla could be in a position where they could replace them all together. And this is where that constellation of on the ground and in the air becomes so damn useful for Elon Musk. Zooming out, Elon Musk has one of the biggest deployments of real-world AI into the world. What does real-world AI mean? You have to perceive the world, understand the world, and then take action accordingly based on your intention. Now, many might say this is too much power, but I think the public sector doesn't actually have an option, because if you think about it, all innovation in technologies, especially at the cutting edge, when it comes to the state of the art, all of that is happening in private sector enterprises. And so when I look at a company like Tesla or SpaceX, I'm actually happy to see Elon doing these things. If you think about it, SpaceX came along and took on one of the most unprofitable industries of which there has never been a startup. America lost the ability to send assets into space. Our ticket to sending satellites and assets into space was going through frickin' Russia. And it took an international immigrant like Elon Musk coming to America to basically take his startup profits from commercial banking and take that PayPal money and put it into something as audacious and as almost foolhardy and crazy as going on and creating reusable rockets to go to space. And of course, you look at some of the other cool stuff that's happening with these autonomous stealth Air Force vehicles that have been tested recently. You best believe there is some sort of a SpaceX tie-in to all of this. So yes, there is a secret space program happening, and I'm so grateful that America has a play in it. It's a very good question whether the government would be more responsible shepherds of this type of data or the public sector. You have examples that are good and bad. If you look at examples such as Snowden, you can see that there was an indiscriminate collection of data taking place, the bulk collection, if you will, and that data was accessed rather indiscriminately. At the same time, when you look at incidents like Facebook and Cambridge Analytica,
putting our private information on offer without concern for possible misuses, I think, is simply irresponsible.
That vast troves of data was aggregated and then accessible to other parties, and then parties were also able to exploit the Facebook social graph to conduct surveys and quizzes to start collecting private information to build social profiles, and then exploit it to achieve outcomes in the real world. But based on my own experience having worked at companies like Google, all I can say is when you look at things like GDPR, stuff that consumer companies actually need to worry about is actually pretty significant. And the legal apparatus and the privacy teams that they set up down to infrastructure level restrictions, these type of compliance measures are actually super crucial. And I wouldn't be surprised if the government doesn't even have these, because they're not even incentivized to implement any of this stuff, because they're big brother after all. They're entitled to all this information. They are the shepherds of society. So it's actually a very good question what that looks like. But what I will also say is that if you look at a place like China, where the membrane between the public and private sector is so permeable and there's cross-pollination happening all the time, they're inextricably linked. They're able to do things and respond to situations faster than the American apparatus can. If you think about things in America, there's something called a geofence warrant. So a federal agency can go to these tech companies and say, hey, look, Facebook or Google or Instagram, give me data associated with this account, or give me data from this time in this mile radius around this incident that took place. We need to figure out who was in and out of the area, and then you can identify people back like that. How soon until Tesla's getting geofence warrants about, hey, did a Tesla camera happen to see anyone go into this, that, and the other location around this time? It's essentially it becomes a roving version of the fleet of security cameras we're voluntarily putting up in all of our homes, right? And so this sensor grid is extremely powerful and has both good and bad applications. With regard to China's influence on Elon, I think there's two ways to look at it. One is obviously Tesla has a big presence in China now. It's only growing. So clearly he has business interests in China. I think that would be hard to deny. At the same time, manufacturing of any kind has some degree of dependency. Maybe the dependency for Elon isn't as acute as perhaps Apple. In fact, one of the ways that Elon has been able to bring cost of electric vehicle manufacturing down and his margins up is by creating custom parts and building things in a more vertically integrated fashion.
The company's aim is to halve its production cost. So if it can do that, the investments it's making in price now will allow it to sell future cars at an even more competitive price.
So there's some benefits there, hence his gigafactory, all that type of stuff. He's trying to verticalize the stack as much as possible, including down to selling of cars. Elon decided to have actual dealerships that they own where you go buy a Tesla vehicle versus Toyota and Ford might be massive companies churning out insane amount of cars, but they are reliant on the dealership networks to get their product out into the hands of customers. So when you think about Tesla and real world AI, cars are one way of deploying this technology in the world. Of course, if you can map the world and perceive the world and understand what's in it and finally take action accordingly, you can also have other autonomous agents doing tasks in the world, such as robots. Even scarier of a proposition, or awesome, depending on how you look at it again, we've got Tesla bots, Elon's foray into humanoid robotics. This is ostensibly an electric vehicle company, but if you think about it, really a computer vision and perception company taking on Boston Dynamics. And now they have manufacturing expertise. All of these technologies will fuse together. Then when you look at SpaceX, Starlink, and frickin' Tesla with this robotics component layered on top, suddenly it can start looking like an amazing Iron Man utopian future where Elon is this genius billionaire that pushes society forward, or at the same time, it turns into Orwell's wildest nightmares. The question of responsibility and the magnitude of responsibility that these companies like Tesla have cannot also be understated. If you think about it, you are creating autonomous agents that are perceiving the world, taking action in the world, and that means in the world of atoms, you can cause immense harm. Obviously, we're talking about things like the trolley problem. These systems at some point in extenuating circumstances will have to make the decision between life and death for a bunch of humans in the world. In that position, who is responsible? Is it the driver? Is it the developer of the algorithms? I think that is an open debate right now. But what is clear is if you are creating systems that are disproportionately having influence on what action is taken in the real world, i.e. full self-driving, obviously I think the company has to take a disproportionate amount of the responsibility. Obviously, human agents are also responsible in the world because we're going to end up in a place where we're going to have to set new behavioral and societal norms for how we behave and conduct ourselves around these type of autonomous systems because they're only going to proliferate more and more in society. So we're going to have to live with them and around them. Twitter at an aggregate level is the pulse of a society. Twitter is like a digital town square. And I love that analogy because it's effectively our thoughts and emotions trolloping across this digital landscape. Our sentiment about a topic or feelings about an issue, what's happening in the world is effectively reflecting itself in these tweets. And when you aggregate all of that together, you get this digital twin of a global conversation, a digital twin of society. So then when you take that map of the world from an overhead perspective, on the ground with Tesla, moving assets in the world, imaging the world, people driving from point A to point B, and you layer in this global conversation, what people everywhere across the world think and feel in a limited amount of characters, which obviously is getting increased now because of course Elon wants to train AI on top of this data. We are seeing the picture complete itself. These layers and facets are coming together to create this digital twin of the real world, and a system that can understand and perceive it can generate content that influences it. And that is the grand play for all of these systems. So Twitter is like this living, breathing digital twin of our collective conversation. And right now, curation algorithms, in a very naive way, are basically prioritizing or deprioritizing what's in your feed. But that prioritization, that curation decision that these platforms are making can influence society on an aggregate level. It's no surprise when things like TikTok are under the national crosshairs of both the left and right in America. Finally, a bipartisan issue that everyone can agree upon. What are these politicians worried about? They're worried about the fact that TikTok could ever so slightly influence and turn the dial on certain types of anti-America, anti-democratic content, by the way, that's created by Americans, amplify it and influence a societal level impact. That could be very bad for democracies, not to mention collecting the data, feeling, and private drafts of kids that will go on to be the executives and politicians of tomorrow. Gosh, this is a whole debate over whether it's free speech. Are these essentially publishers that are having an editorial opinion, or are these essentially aggregators of user-generated content? That debate has gone on, but in reality, the issue has been nuanced. I think even Elon is probably appreciating, once he was on the outside looking in, there were probably a lot of issues that came across as massive blunders and biased decision-making within curation and moderation teams within organizations such as Meta and Twitter. But in reality, after taking the reins, we can already see that not all of Elon's decisions have been popular with the public. Like, here are just some examples on the screen. But if we take this to the next level, it still is an open question whether platforms should be held accountable for these type of curation decisions. What I will say is that as we're going away from this social-based graph where you were looking at things that your friends are doing to this sort of For You feed, this interest-based graph, where these algorithms, and now they're pervasive across YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, the list goes on and on. Since we're using algorithms to curate this sort of For You feed, it does feel like the responsibility forms disproportionately on the product engineering and policy teams that are defining what sort of content does get amplified and seen on your For You page. I think the level of responsibility will only go up because there's an explosion of content taking place, from Hollywood making one-size-fits-all movies to a crap load of YouTube videos to an ever-growing explosion of TikTok videos. There's just far too much content for us to figure out and sift through, search for, and find in this explicit fashion. Of course, I think Elon has the responsibility to prevent the spread of misinformation, especially if Twitter algorithms are going to amplify misinformation. But what is misinformation? How do you define truth? That is a difficult question. So it's funny to me that Elon wants to go after Truth GPT, something that is trying to figure out and decompose the mysteries of the universe. And for some reason, that's going to result in it always going after objective truth, because certain things are not objective. Certain things we do not have the right information. For example, let's take an issue like the speed of light. Yes, we agree upon it, but take another issue like the origin of this thing that kept us locked down for the last couple of years. We still cannot agree upon it. So what is truth, and how do you moderate and police truth? This always becomes a slippery slope, because the same technology that is required to police misinformation is essentially creating a surveillance grid of immense influence and control. And so it's interesting to see Elon is taking on this sort of intermediate community-driven approach with community notes. For example, if there is a very nuanced issue and somebody might be trying to put a bit of a spin on it, other members of the community can cite reputable sources and provide the counter narrative. And I think that, taken in balance, is how we used to make decisions and how we need to start making decisions. Here's one side of the argument, here's the other. Maybe it's a multifaceted issue, but we take all the sources together and then make our own decision, because a lot of things in life are not absolute. There's certainly a lot of gray, and I think this is one really nice way to get a sense of what the gamut of opinions are, and then figure out where you fall on a certain issue and how you want to choose to react to it. So it's very interesting to me to see Twitter constantly increasing the post links. Of course, Twitter wants not just to take out Substack and not have to worry about it. Oh my God, a lot of controversy associated there. But at the same time, one of the first acts of Elon to come in was to go revoke OpenAI's database access to Twitter. And he did this because I think he believes that this sort of real-time data source can be very powerful if you put this LLM layer on top of it. And of course, right now, the architecture of LLMs requires this massive pre-training step. Even if you take a Bing Chat style architecture or this code interpreter or auto GPT type approach where you give these agents access to the internet, giving it access to live tweets would allow you to create some very novel applications, especially in the context of what Elon really wants to do, which is X, which is this all-encompassing application that is like a mix of WeChat mini apps, where in this one application where you as a developer can create a bunch of these mini apps that billions of users could use to take actions in the physical and the digital world. And that's crucial. Whether you want to get a taxi, whether you pay for a meal, whether you want to order some food, or whether you want to create a new AI selfie or a filter, or whatever you want to do, having this sort of hub where you can access a bunch of these services and essentially build businesses is perhaps what Elon's endgame actually is. So we haven't talked about Neuralink so far, and that's because it's a little bit farther out there. But I think it's an important piece of Elon's constellation of companies where the sum is certainly greater than its parts. And so with Neuralink, Elon is building a brain-computer interface. Look at this video. It allows you to have this high bandwidth communication between organic and silicon intelligence. Look at this big-ass brain. At a micro level, we've got neurons and mapping brain activity. That's the approach that Neuralink is taking. You go from imaging and sensing the world to start imaging and sensing the brain, giving it a bunch of different types of stimuli and creating this digital twin of different types of activity. And then from that, you can reverse engineer and figure out how to create this bidirectional flow between the brain and digital systems. So when you put that stack together with Starlink satellites in space, Tesla sensors on the ground, Twitter measuring the global conversation, and finally Neuralink measuring your own thoughts and perceptions, Elon has an unprecedented amount of power, where on the push of a button, he could decide public sentiment and then go about targeting individuals to sway their opinion. And of course, we're talking about a science fiction scenario, but it is fun to think about, and it is awe-inspiring the scale and scope of the sheer operation that is coming together. It remains to be seen how X app actually shapes up and what Elon is doing with these 10,000 GPUs that he decided to buy. Because a big problem in the entire AI space today is 80% of the market for the infrastructure that you need to train these amazing AI models is owned by Jensen Huang. At 60 leather jackets per second, it is basically NVIDIA that is doing all the rendering, all the generation, and all the training of these AI systems. Now sure, Elon does have efforts like Dojo under play at Tesla, where they're trying to go the Google route, where Google's built their own TPUs to reduce that dependency on NVIDIA. Tesla is going about building these Dojo systems that could potentially allow Elon to hedge. But for the time being, he has a massive operation, and it's a good question of exactly how Elon will connect these dots. But what you saw in this video is my take. Some dramatic speculation, but mostly informed hypotheses about how such a strategy may come together. But in order to get the full picture, we have to look at his competition. And let me tell you, there is no shortage of rivals gunning to take the throne, because supreme power attracts supreme competition. From trillion-dollar tech giants to former friends turned foes, Elon won't ascend unopposed. So click this next video and join me in part 2, where we'll examine the threats to his vision. Can Elon's innovation outpace his enemies, or will the competition destroy his grand design? See you in part 2.